The set is empty now, but as we look to the beginning of the new year, I can't help but to think of the past year and all the great conversations we've had with veterans right here. I'm Joshua Zebley. Join me as we take a look back at Veterans Voices shows of 2023. We started the year off by talking with veterans who are saving our natural resources in our January show, Veterans and the Environment.
Thoughts on how can veterans support environmental issues? What would you recommend that folks do?
I was thinking on the last, as we ended the last segment, we talk a lot about the big picture, the environment and the climate change. And what we need to focus on is the little individual pieces, because the little individual pieces, doing each one of those, somebody doing one or two of those, is what builds up to solve the big climate change piece. So when people get overwhelmed and they talk about climate change, they think of it as some big thing that they can't attack. And that's what we need to convince people: they can attack it, and how they can attack it, what little things they can do every day. Several of the folks that talked in between talked about it. How can you save water? How can you use less water? Because every time we use water, that's all produced for us, and it has to be filtered and cleaned and that sort of thing. And then every time it goes down the drain, it goes back into the cycle, but we still have to cycle it back. So how do we use less water in everything that we do? And it doesn't matter whether it's at your house, whether it's me on the farm or somebody on a ranch or in a industrial production. How do we reduce that use of water? And that's particularly coming to fruition as we look at the drought in the Western United States. How are we going to alleviate that a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
It's like spokes on a wheel, right? We all play a role. It's a cycle. It's the carbon cycle, right? And there are many spokes in the carbon cycle. And I remember in basic training, the last guy on the video, he said, "We're veterans. We need to do it." I remember in basic training, a drill sergeant always saying, "Don't worry, privates, we'll fix it." And it was not fun after he said that. So the work is going to be hard. Though we've done a good job messing up the planet, so we need to lead the way.
I think that there's simple things that people can do, right? I mean, I think you heard a lot of people say recycle. I mean, that's one thing. The one thing we find is, by gosh, waste less food, because that food that you're throwing in the trash can, whether it's from a restaurant or from the grocery store or something you cooked, it has resources to it. It costs water. It not only costs money, it costs water. It costs, carbon. It costs lots of things, biodiversity pieces to that. So if there's one thing I could tell people is, don't waste food. Eat, as much as you can. If you could waste less food, if we would cut our waste in half, we'd be way further towards our climate goals than we are right now, just by cutting our food waste in half.
I agree with that. I was listening to those speakers and I'm thinking, I do all those things, and that's great. And I do a lot more as well. I think we can learn a lot from the indigenous people, the people that are still, that still live on the land. And the Iroquois, for example, had in their confederation before Europeans came to the continent, when they thought about making decisions about the environment, they thought about, what's the effect of this going to be on the next 7 generations? And one of the things I think we can do, besides being personal, doing the personal stuff, is figure out how to take a longer term view of things. And like I said, any organization that's doing climate or environmental work that you want to work with, that floats your boat, there's plenty of them out there. You may not like mine, that's fine. You may like somebody else's, that's great. But it's I think getting involved and doing something beyond that personal stuff, which I do all that stuff. drive an electric car, have solar panels, monitor, have governors on the water and everything. But I mean, if everybody did that, that would help, but it still wouldn't mitigate the bigger issue. So I think there's a tandem approach, working on the smaller stuff and looking at a shift in the way that we view stuff. Because I grew up as you throw it out. Like, I don't throw food out. It either goes in green waste, which gets recycled in mulch and fertilizer, or it goes into compost. There's those, everybody can make those kinds of choices. I know in some municipalities, they don't have green waste, which I think is a good project to lean on your city or your county. Why don't we have this? Or some places don't have recycling. Why don't we have this?
In February, the show celebrated Black History Month. We had a chance to talk with a local historian about an event that took place here in Contra Costa County, California, where the show is based, the Port Chicago disaster.
Continue talking about history. We kind of want to move forward and talk about another highlight of 1944. We had an event that took place right in Contra Costa, California, where the show is based. So here we want to talk about the Port Chicago disaster.
Munitions manufactured around the country would arrive at Port Chicago daily by train. As a transit site, not a storage site, the cargo had to be unloaded as rapidly as possible. It was the job of the black enlisted sailors to manually transfer the munitions from the rail cars to large cargo ships. Many people warned the fast pace of the work, the huge volume of munitions being moved, loading 2 ships on one pier, and the lack of proper training, proper safety procedures would lead to disaster. 2 explosions, 6 seconds apart, ignited the night sky with a column of fire and steel rising 2 miles. The first blast was fairly small. The second incinerated 2 ships, the pier, 16 rail cars, 320 men.
So Diana, I know that you've spent a lot of time kind of helping to make sure that Port Chicago disaster has never been forgotten. And I'd love for you to just get a chance to kind of explain the significance of Port Chicago and the work that you are doing to make sure that we as the public know what the significance of that event was.
Well, I've been involved with it for about 20 years, more than 20 years actually. And there's always something new I'm learning or experiencing with it. And when you have African-American sailors who couldn't go to the bathroom on the ships that they were loading because they were loading the munitions, when they would have to walk a mile to go to a bathroom, when they were not treated well at all in the city of Port Chicago. There was a city, Port Chicago, that the Naval Magazine was named after. They just were not, it was the time, it was the 40s. There was great discrimination and racist acts that were going on. And some of the stories they would tell about, they could only go to Oakland. And I remember one guy told a story. He says he was with some white sailors. He goes over to San Francisco. They go to a bar for entertainment, but they will not be served in the bar. The bartender would not serve the African-American sailors. So it was that time that they were severely discriminated against. And only allow, and like the little clips showed, they did not have any training. not proper training, even though there were people who were available who offered to do the training, and the Navy didn't allow it. And then to blame the men for the explosion, and then to find when the white sailors got to go on a 30-day leave after the explosion. You know, they didn't call it what post-traumatic stress syndrome at that time. But then the white guys went off and then the black guys, they sent over to Mare Island to go back to work.
For our March show, we examined post-traumatic stress triggers and how to handle them. Our vet on the street, Stephen Burchick, asked veterans what things triggered memories of service, then a very honest conversation with Army veteran Thurman McCormick.
My name is Stephen Burchick, and we're here with Veterans Voices. The segment today is Vet on the Street. We're gathered at the Veterans Memorial Building in Danville, where a lot of veterans are watching the annual Army-Navy game. Our question today is, what is a sound or smell or sight that reminds you of your time in the military?
Dennis Giacovelli, U.S. Navy. I still remember the sound of the helicopters, especially the Hueys. They make that whop sound. But whenever we were in trouble, we liked hearing that sound. They would come and save our butts. Smell, I don't know. I think maybe fireworks, because we used to do a lot of pop flares, and they have a very similar smell.
Hi, I'm Pat Leary, U.S. Army Aviation. So that question kind of easy for me. Number one is the sound is a helicopter. That brings back all kinds of memories. And number two is the smell. Even though I was a helicopter pilot, I ate more than my share of sea rations and baked beans. The smell of baked beans bring back memories. So thank you for asking.
Again, my name is Mike Mundell. I'm a U.S. Army officer and still currently serve in the Army Reserves. You know, that I think back to my deployment in Afghanistan, and I think it's something that probably most Americans can relate to. It's just the sound of any fighter aircraft. So, I'd take these walks around post at Bagram Air Base, and if you're out there still before dawn, many times the F-16s would come in from whatever mission they were flying, and literally be 200 feet above you in an otherwise really quiet environment. Just the sound of that airplane really did, I don't know, just kind of validate everything you do in the military. It just kind of made you feel as if we're doing the right thing.
My name's Devin Washoe. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and I remember the incredible sound of mosquitoes. And in the middle of the night, you're out on patrol, and the sound of the mosquitoes just fills the air, and you can't imagine, how can it be so loud? And you imagine there's billions of them around you, and it's pretty incredible sound. And also I remember the sagebrush. I think that's what that is in Camp Pendleton. That just reminds me of all those mountains we had to hump.
Well, hi, I'm Michelle Lee, and I'm a United States Air Force veteran. And I also on a board of a special district, which is a fire protection district. And the other day I went on a ride along, and they were bringing out their SCBA, which is the breathing apparatuses they use during fires. And it reminded me of gas masks that I wore during my assignment in Europe. And we would have to sit around for hours in those gas masks at sometimes when the base was being closed or threatened through activity. So that's what it reminded me of, sitting around in gas masks for hours on end.
Michael Slatengren, United States Navy veteran. Probably the biggest thing that reminds me of my service is anything that I see that has to do with the currently serving military. I think back when I served back in the late 60s as a young, what was I? Well, teenager, late teens, early 20s. And what I was doing in order to serve my country, and had no idea what life was going to be like for me as I got out. But now that I see young veterans and young military, currently serving military. It reminds me of those days, and I get flashbacks every once in a while to those days that I served.
Okay. I'm Mark Heineman, U.S. Army Reserve, and the smell that really represents the Army to me when I smell it is the exhaust from diesel vehicles. I think back to all the diesel vehicles and power generators during my service, and that's my memory. And when I smell that, I think, yes, I remember those days, even though they were 50 years ago.
I'm curious, how can, because Thurman mentioned earlier that it really wasn't until his children left the house where he started to have that self-reflection. And then you're mentioning, Dr. Evans, that we do want to catch veterans earlier, if at all possible, when they leave the military service. What role does the family play in identifying those triggers or helping the veteran identify those triggers? Would you say it's helpful for a family member to have that conversation with their veteran, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, very much. One of the things I usually do when I do an intake, when I initially meet with a veteran, is that they come with someone, or a family member. I always ask if they want to have that person in the room, because the veteran will say oftentimes, I sleep fine. And then the bed partner will say, no, you wake up 5 times in the night, you throw out the sheets, you have hot flashes, you have night terrors. And so that information is really important. And lots of times family members will notice it before the veteran does.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to make a point. I think before you talked about triggers, and you said sometimes there's a situation and you try to get yourself out of that. Is that always practical to remove yourself from a situation?
It's not always practical, but if you have the chance to do it, it's a good way to do it. To move yourself back. Like at work, sometimes somebody would do something that I thought I was right on, and they would say, no, you're not, and that would, I'd get really mad. And then I'd say, well, wait a minute, let me back off here to myself. I'm always talking to myself, trying to make sure that I don't do something stupid, So I have to do this for a trigger like that, Say, wait a minute, I'm back off here, I'll go over here and do something else. And that helps me a lot when I get triggered like that. But, but like you said, when you said, I had all of that time, but nobody told me that there were vet centers out there. Nobody told me that I could go get help. They cut me loose and that was it. And when I come from a culture that's not the same as you, so they weren't aware. They were aware that I had changed, really changed. So they didn't want to have nothing to do with me. They kind of pushed back. So they kind of let me stumble around. And
I just want to highlight one thing you're saying, Thurman, too. That pause is so important. So when you're dealing with a trigger, especially if you can't leave a situation, just taking a step back as you do and say kind of like, what am I missing? Is there someone else I can check with? Is there really danger here? Those are wonderful techniques to use.
Yeah.
I think we're going to talk a little bit more about coping with triggers, but I'm curious, for the younger veterans, when they're first coming in, or new veterans, because they might be older veterans coming in for the first time, right? What are some things that you talk to them about to help them identify what's going on inside of them, but they don't have those words to share?
Well, you have to listen first. You have to listen and hear what he's saying. How was it when you went into combat? What did you do? What situation were you put in? Was somebody killed, or were you wounded? And then you go from there. Yeah. That's how I did it.
Start off by listening.
Yeah, I listened to them and say, well, this is the way I'd cope with something like that. If my friend got shot, what did I do? How did I help him? Did I stay there with him, or did I move out? You have to evaluate that situation that he's in, and then you put yourself, or what experience you had.
You're sharing your experience,
right,
but
with
you're starting off by allowing that veteran to share their experience.
You want to listen
first.
to them,
yeah.
And then you put your, your little 2 bits in, and help them, because they'll listen. if you experience the same thing they did, they will listen to you even more. And since I'm older, they listen to me. Still have people, younger vets, say, come and talk to me.
And I'm curious, who was it for you, Thurman, when you first walked into the vet center that listened?
Well, it was a counselor, and we didn't get along to begin with. I told him how I felt, and I said, you know what, you're pulling the wool over my eyes, but I didn't say it like that. I told him, off and stuff. But then I realized when I went home, like she said, I took myself away from there, and I said, wait a minute, maybe he is right. So then I went back for the second time.
In our April show, we talked with veteran athletes and we're honored to host a group of veterans from Invictus Games Foundation who compete on an international level.
Andrew, I don't know if we asked you, how did you get involved in the foundation?
Oh, wow. So in 2010, there was a competition yearly called the Warrior Games. And myself being an injured vet from the Navy, they said, hey, we have this competition for wounded, ill, and injured, and it's out of Colorado. You'll represent your respective branch of service. You should try it as like a form of rehab and recovery and therapy. It'll give you an opportunity to push yourself and find your new normal. So I competed at the Warrior Games for 4 years, and in 2013, 2014 timeframe, that's when the opportunity to compete at the Invictus Games on an international level was born. Because the previous years of the Warrior Games would actually invite nations that are our allies. They would bring their team of wounded, ill, and injured to compete at the Warrior Games, and then it was just building a relationship from there. Every year we would see it, and we would have it here in Colorado, here in the States, and then once the Invictus Games was born, we said, hey, let's broaden this. There's a lot more brothers and sisters out there that can benefit from this type of, competition. So that's really my journey. And now that I'm on the moderator side of the house, it's like a double-edged sword. I can kind of dip my hand in the pot.
Excellent.
I want to get back to Steve in a second. A little more about what inspired you to get involved. I think we've got a couple of images as well that we'd like to share. But once again, what did get you involved, and why did you stay with it?
Sure, that's a great question. I'd have to start by saying it wasn't easy. After I was injured, I kind of lost myself. I lost my purpose. I wanted to do 20 years in the service. I was kind of forced out of that. I had to move back home after traveling the world. There was a lot that was happening all at the same time. And I can say that I was in a dark place. I didn't have much support. I didn't know any other veterans that were going through the same thing. And I was kind of self-medicating and just was in a really dark place until somebody from Navy Safe Harbor reached out to me and invited me to a adaptive sports camp out in Hawaii. And I had turned down a couple other invitations before that, but when they pitched Hawaii at me, I kind of couldn't pass that one up. So I went out there, still hesitant. I was an able-bodied athlete for most of my life. And when they said, you want to play wheelchair basketball? I was like, no way. Like, I'm injured, but that's for disabled people. And I put that off for a couple of years until I got that invitation out there. And I went out there, competed at 6 or 7 different sports, and I just fell in love. I fell in love with the sport. I fell in love with the competition. I fell in love with being back with my brothers and sisters in the military. There's such a special bond between all of us. And even after being injured and having to find your identity again, it was great with all of us being together. I don't think I could have done it on my own. And it was from there, making the team, that made me want to go home and start training and being like, hey, man, I saw some guys that are missing legs that are blowing me out of the water in these sports. I should be better. But the thing is they had time in sport. They had training. And so I was able to take that back home. And given the opportunity to work with some former collegiate athletes, that really helped me step my game up and helped encourage me to keep going to the gym, keep pushing, getting myself out there with other veteran athletes and seeing their stories. It just encouraged me to just not give up. This is such a beautiful program and competition that I hope anybody who's eligible can find a way to get in and compete.
Dan, Stephen was sharing just a moment ago about his hesitation, how when he first came in and was introduced to the idea of playing wheelchair basketball, that he kind of immediately shut that down in his mind. Is this a common experience for veterans who are participating as a coach? Do you see that hesitation? And then what do you do with it? How can you help someone move past that?
It very much is, especially with athletes who played basketball before as an able body, and they're not used to using a wheelchair, so they don't really want to learn a whole new sport because it's so much different. So it was very true. I remember the exact moment in Hawaii that Davis didn't come to a practice until the very last day, and the first time he comes out and he goes to Coach Grant and says, "Hey, can you sub me in?" And within 2 minutes, he did a behind the back pass for an assist. And me and Grant flipping through our sheets like, who is this guy? Like, so it was, but yes, there is that stigma where they're very hesitant at first. But once they start playing, or once they see someone competing in it, then they get the itch again.
On our May show, we focused on veterans leaving service and pursuing higher education. We explored the transition to education with Brian Vargas of the Veteran Resource Center of City College of San Francisco and a panel of student veterans.
Brian, I know you have a very interesting military career. Can you tell us about your military career and then your transition to college after?
Sure. Briefly, my name is Brian. I was in the Marine Corps. I served with 3-4 Lima Company in 2000, from 06 to 07. And while I was out there in Iraq, I ended up getting injured. I got medevaced and spent a lot of time recovering, and found my transition leading me straight into college, like Tony, right, and Anna as well, where it was probably one of the most secure places to get your feet under you as a just newly transitioned veteran, right? Living in my car, went from living in my car to couch hopping, trying to figure things out. But it was a wildest time. Went to DVC, went to UC Berkeley a couple of times, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing today at City College.
I think we hear a lot about the kind of turbulent transition coming out of the military. Add college on top of that, and I know it can get really crazy, so I'd love to talk more about that. But first, can you tell us, this is a question for any of the panelists, did the GI Bill actually help you get into school? Like when we're talking about admissions, did the GI Bill help you get into school, or did you still need to pass an admissions test or submit an admissions packet? And keep in mind that this is for folks that are just coming out of the military and really wanting to learn about this process. They might not be as familiar with the GI Bill. Anna, can you talk to us a little bit about your entrance to college in that process?
Right. So to get into the community college, I didn't have a problem. I didn't have to really apply. So, but the GI Bill did really help me with, especially playing with bills and all that stuff that's really important, because I think that's the part that when we're in the military, we think about how we're going to pay for our bills, where we're going to live. So by getting the GI Bill really helps with all that transition. It makes your peace of mind better. So so with other universities, I don't know how that really works. I've just been to community college, but the GI Bill is a blessing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Brian, I know you started in community college and then you switched to the university level. Do you have some experience with the differences between admissions in the community college level and admissions at the university level?
Yeah, it's changed today, right? I ended up going to Diablo Valley College a while back, but I was on the IGETSI plan, which was something where it was, my academic counselor, who we'll get to hear from one here in a moment, right, was able to set me up with an education path that led me into meeting all the requirements that I wanted to make for the major that I had, which was at the time sociology, transferring into social work. So my education counselor helped me really navigate that path while I was at DVC, and then had to still, write a personal statement, had to apply for the school, had to pass all the classes to get into the school. UC Berkeley, right, they keep about a 3.0 GPA thing to get in, so I had to make sure I get good grades at the same time as being stressed out, paying bills, and Man, you know, it gets pretty stressed out those first few semesters when you're trying to get your feet going. But as Anna was saying, that GI Bill housing allowance is really helpful for transition veterans who are looking to, you know, try to find a house or live, you know, somewhere nearby the campus that they're going to. So, yeah, that, you know, transitioning, you still have to make all those regular application steps. You don't just get the GI Bill and get to pick, you know, I want to go to a UC or CSU necessarily, unless you've maybe met some requirements out of it.
Our June show was about finding focus. We talked with veteran archers, and in this clip, we talked with 2 organizations that train veterans to be professional referees and umpires. It was also a good excuse to dress up our host a bit.
You guys kind of start the show and talk about your service first. So we'll start with you, Andrew.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm coming from Charleston, South Carolina, originally from, Buffalo, New York. United States Marine Corps veteran. I did 5 years, 3 deployments. And after my 3rd deployment, I decided to get out and use my GI Bill. I went back to school. I was lucky enough to play college football, where I played for 4 years. After I was finished, I was still looking for something to do as far as like being involved with the sport. And that's when I seen an advertisement that Mike on the TV talking about his great program, Benefits of Ball Fields. And I couldn't email him fast enough to get going with it.
Thank you so much for that intro and for your service. One thing I forgot to point out earlier in the show, but I'll go ahead and highlight it now since you mentioned where you're located. We here at Veterans Voices are a national show, and we've got folks that are not only live on set in our California studio, but we've got folks tuning in from all over the place. So thank you for whatever coast you're on, whatever ocean you're in the middle of, like me here in Hawaii. We are appreciative of you tuning in with us this evening. So Dave, I want to hear from you about your service and your connection to being a referee.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us on. I am coming to you from Longmont, Colorado. It is one of the northern suburbs of Denver, so about 20 minutes north of downtown Denver. I went ROTC through college, so I was fortunate enough to receive a 3-year Army scholarship. Went to the University of Memphis, graduated in 1993. Started actually umpiring in 1993 as a way just to earn a little bit of extra money through college. But throughout completing my service obligation, I was stationed in Arizona, Texas, and then that's what brought me to Colorado. Had dabbled in officiating while I was still on active duty and everything else. A couple of pictures there up on the screen that's current. But got off active duty, ended up joining and finishing my time in the reserves. So I have actually spent time out at Pearl Harbor. So very jealous of where you're sitting right now. Miss those times out at Hickam and Makalapa and some of the other places out there. But it came across Patty Harsh's organization in 2019. As a matter of fact, when they put the call out to figure out how to do a better job of recruiting officials to get involved in the baseball and softball community here in Colorado. And since I had never really formally gone through anything other than OJT or what maybe a couple of mentors on the field had done, I decided I was going to show up to one of their clinics. And it turned out to be an absolutely amazing experience. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the segment and field some Q&As. But the opportunity space has given me an unbelievable set of opportunities that I would have probably never gotten otherwise. So extremely grateful for that. And I look forward to talking about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that intro. And we truly appreciate your service. And since you mentioned Patty, we'll just dive right into Miss Patty Harsh and talk about the organization that kind of got you started there, Dave. So Patty, we want to give you the floor, ma'am, to discuss who you are and a little bit about your organization.
Sounds great. Thanks, Aaron. And really nice wardrobe change. Good for you. We'll have to get you a chest protector and a helmet and some shin guards, though, and put you behind the plate. So I'm Patty, and it was great to hear from Dave beforehand because he was one of our original veterans who went through a training and certification and has gone on to do amazing work, not only in the state of Colorado, officiating, umpiring, actually, but travels to different parts of the country and officiates as well. But in any case, the organization actually was built in honor of my brother, who served in Vietnam. He's a Marine. And later in life suffered a life-threatening stroke. And those that came out to help me really bring my brother back to life and get him to the place that he needed to be were veterans. I also work for an organization called Triple Crown Sports based out of Fort Collins, Colorado, which is where I reside. And I'm in the HR, culture, learning and development realm, and part of the leadership team there at the time, and had the opportunity to really dig into how I might be able to give back to veterans through that role, through our organization. And also, just we're noticing through running 125 sporting events through Triple Crown Sports across the country per year, on average of about 300 participants team-wise in our sports, there's a drastic shortage of officials going on across America. And so I thought, well, what if I could take and do a give back to the veterans through training, certifying, and equipping them at zero cost to them, and perhaps put them right to work at Triple Crown Sports once they get certified to be able to officiate games or any sporting or any sanctioning organization that might need officials. And then go ahead and also be an organization who might be offsetting this drastic shortage of officials in the country. So that came to fruition in 2019. Had a bit of a stoppage due to COVID, but we are back going strong. In fact, certified 3 more baseball officials earlier this week in Omaha, Nebraska. And we're at about 200 veterans that have become officials, mostly softball, baseball right now, but we're open to training and certifying and equipping in all sports. And through this, met my good friend now, Mike Pereira, with Battlefields to Ballfields, and he'll be able to tell us a little bit about, I was providing gently used officiating equipment, and Mike called me one day and said, Patty, we got to get him in crisp, clean, new stuff. So that's where Mike comes in.
Well, let's talk to Mike, because you guys have a very similar organization going, and it's kind of neat that you guys collaborate the way that you do. So let's hand it off to Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Pereira. I live in Sacramento, California. And yeah, Patty and I are kindred spirits, quite frankly, because our thoughts are the same. Civilians who want to get more veterans involved in things. And so I just sit here and listen to even the archers talking, and thoughts come to my mind of how we can even get involved in that sport. And when you say, Leah said, you know, we have judges and stuff, I mean, I would certainly love to have judges, archery judges, a part of our program. And she even said that you had blind archers, right? Which most people would say they'd make good referees, as a matter of fact. That's what the general public thinks. But I started Battlefields to Ballfields in 2017 after a thought process. I had met some homeless veterans in Southern California. I drove to Oregon. I make myself a commitment to drive to Oregon, or at least a very lengthy drive, every summer without noise. No radio, no books on tapes, nothing. Once I get past Sacramento, I have 6.5 hours of silence. But it's not silence. It's not silence. It's just listening to what's going on in here. And after I met those homeless veterans, I was thinking about them and the fact that I didn't serve and what could I do. And then I started thinking about officiating, since I've been involved in that since 1970. And I thought, veterans, commitment, courage, teamwork, mission.
Our July show was all about things culinary as we discussed Vets in the Kitchen. In this clip, we hear from veteran chef Archie Lee Smith Jr. and Aaron Prater, culinary instructor at Diablo Valley College.
You had 2 huge pieces of meat that looked so tasty. How did you wind up with all the choices for foods to cook and eat? Did you wind up with barbecue?
You know, my family's from Arkansas, a small town, 500-person town called Wilmot, Arkansas. It's maybe 5 minutes from Louisiana and 20 minutes from Mississippi. And they were sharecroppers. So we had to cook for 30 to 50 people in a short amount of time, 2 times a day at least. And I would just watch my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles just come together around this big pit, and they'd have all this heat on one side and no heat on the other side, and they'd sear the meat, have it looking like it's almost done, and I'd go to grab some meat off the pit and they'd slap my hand and then that's not done, you're gonna get sick. And I'm like, wait, it looks done to me. So I'd move it, they'd move it over, and this is the way that I learned how to cook. And it was mass amounts of people. So I just kind of segued that into, when I was volunteering for the VFW out in Brentwood at the Memorial Building. It was the Marine Corps League, the American Legion, the VFW. And I'm just cooking for, all these veterans organizations and basically practicing, cutting my teeth, cooking for 200-300 people at a time. And, I've done a big crab feed for the Marine Corps League, 300 people, made a huge pasta sauce and, put crab on the barbecue pit for them, things they never seen before. But it's just been a great ride to be able to incorporate food and veterans, because like everybody else is saying, that, you get a real feeling of enjoyment from really the process of cooking and following instructions the right way, and how it comes out when you follow the instructions the right way, and then the response from people and the gratefulness that you feel, and that you see from them just saying thank you, and it's just a good thing.
And this question could be for Aaron or Archie. Have you reached out to the VA in terms of getting assistance with learning your craft or learning your skill?
Well, I used my GI Bill for culinary school, and then I'm also a disabled veteran, and so I've since used the VRNE program. I'm currently in a master's degree program in horticulture with an emphasis on urban food systems, basically how we get food from the fields and from the farmers to people, particularly in urban environments. And so the VA has been a huge benefit to my career and a great asset.
That's amazing.
August was a deep dive into a problem that plagues many veterans, sleep issues. We hosted sleep experts and veterans who experience problems with sleep. In this clip, we hear from veterans Jet Gardner and Anime Tumanek.
Can you describe some issues you may have had after service?
Sure. I didn't sleep. I didn't even realize I wasn't sleeping. I had been sleep deprived while I was in the service. In particular, the last year, I was pretty much only getting about 4 hours of sleep per night. And so when I came out, I had a lot of physical problems, and I didn't realize until one of my doctors said, "Hey, how's your sleep?" And then we reoriented what we focused on. But I was waking with nightmares and panic, heart racing, sweating, my eyes bulging out of my head, kind of thing. And then, of course, like others have mentioned, like not wanting to go to sleep because not wanting to experience that. But initially, a lot of hypervigilance around the property, what's going on, who's in the neighborhood, windows, doors, all kinds of things like that as well. That was keeping me awake. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Anna-Mae, I'm sorry. So we talked about nightmares. It sounds like there's a theme that everyone's experiencing nightmares, and then that kind of leads to some sleep avoidance. Ray, you talked about sleep apnea and how that affects your partner. This is just kind of a question for the team, whoever wants to get us started. How did these issues affect your daily life, whether it be, I was in school or I was working? How did it affect your relationships?
Jet, how about you?
I was going to say, I don't mind starting. So mine started actually in Afghanistan, my first tour. I started just getting these really abstract, like nothing war related at all, just hyper violent, weird, graphic dreams that would be so bad that sometimes I'd wake up and I wouldn't know that it was a dream. Personally, my least favorite kind of nightmare is the kind that happens in the same room that you went to sleep in. Mm-hmm. Because when you wake up, like you just don't know what's real and what's not. There's that whole several moments of confusion, and then you're just scared to go back to sleep. And so, I mean, here in Afghanistan or afterwards, working a job, you just end up sleeping less and less and less. That becomes a cyclic problem. And next thing you know, I mean, it affects job performance. It'll affect your awareness at work, attention to detail starts slipping, and just everything just cascades. And then you feel bad about it, and it just snowballs. There's just no positives until you figure out, some way to get that under control.
Our September show was a celebration of the human-animal bond titled Pets and Vets. In this segment, we talked about the great work Pups for Patriots program is doing, providing service animals for veterans.
The human-animal bond so important, especially for veterans.
Yes. The human-animal bond is fascinating. It really rests on the assumption that there's something about animals that attracts humans. We have an innate need to interact with animals in nature. And there's accounts of animals benefiting human health as far back as 1860, when Florence Nightingale noted that pets were excellent companions for the sick. And since then, there's been animal assisted therapy and more interaction of animals helping human health. And so as those benefits have increased, we've realized that of particular interest is research on how service dogs can help military veterans. And so we're delighted to see that there's really been a surge of research that is demonstrating that some of these studies are showing that service dogs can reduce stress and anxiety levels. They can mitigate depression, ease in social reintegration, confidence in veterans. And so it's so wonderful to see that the research is showing what we have experienced personally with our veterans and Mike, that animals enhance our lives. And so in the case of veterans with PTSD, animals can be life-saving.
Like I said, when we first started bonding, it was a learning experience for both of us, but we've been together 3 years now, and like her main tasks that she was trained for are called blocking and grounding. Blocking being that I can put her in a position where she kind of gives me that little bit of a safety bubble so that people don't come right up on me, which I have a big personal space, so she's good with that. And then the grounding is like if I'm having an anxious moment or something like that, she'll do whatever she can to take and have my focus on her and get me away from whatever is causing that anxiety. But through our bond over the last few years, she's picked up on when I'm experiencing nightmares. She does nightmare interruptions. She'll wake me up out of a dead sleep if I'm having a nightmare. And that's not something that she was initially trained to do, but because of our bond, she's done it. And just like I experience migraines pretty bad, from time to time, she'll start licking the top of my head. And I don't know if it's a chemical thing that she's sensing that I'm going to start having a migraine, or, she just, for whatever reason, she does that. Whenever I'm starting to have a migraine, she'll start licking my head and everything. And like Amy was saying, with her, I've been able to cut my medication down for my depression to the bare minimum dosage, which is huge because I don't like taking meds if I don't have to. And I know there's studies out there where I believe it's something in the range of 92% of veterans that have service dogs, they can eliminate or reduce their dosage on medications that they are taking.
Well, that is great to hear. It sounds like that bond is real and you've been experiencing it for some time.
In October, we focused on what can be the most difficult time in a veteran's life, the transition to the civilian world. In this clip, we talked with two veterans freshly out of service, Jessica Engel and Andreas Garcia.
It was kind of jarring to start class and you feel a little bit older and you're surrounded by younger students, but connecting with the Veterans Club was what really kind of brought me out of my shell. What about you, Jessica? What brought you out of your shell on campus?
The same exact thing, going to the Veterans Club. I'd say I'm a shy person, so being connected to fellow veterans is a safe place for me.
Yeah, awesome.
I think the veterans definitely need to know, student veterans need to know how important it is to go into a VRC, a Veteran Resource Center. Almost every community college in the state has them. So I think it's where you can find like-minded people and people that are going through exactly the same thing. Andres, you're an officer at DVC in the club?
So I'm an officer in the Students Veterans Alliance Club, and that's pretty much a club that
gathers veterans and dependents and also other students that want to learn more about veterans and that lifestyle. And we just get together and have kind of like a separate group away from the normal college kids because we understand each other a little bit differently than the other students.
Yeah, that's really important.
It definitely makes sense.
I wanted to ask, so if you could think back to when you were first getting out of the military, did you know you wanted to go to college, or was it a decision that you made after you were already out?
So my plan was to get my real estate license and work with my dad. Unfortunately, that didn't really pan out, so I said the next best thing is to go to college and to see if I can get some higher education.
Nice. And did you have any trouble, you're both using the GI Bill, right?
Yes.
Did you have any trouble learning about how to use that benefit? And if so, was there a certain person or organization that you reached out to for help?
So when I applied to college, I was really scared and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So when I went to the college and I asked, can you help me? They said, oh, I'm the veteran service officer. I'm gonna walk you through this.
Nice.
And he gave me a list of what you need, what papers they need, and they pretty much said, just give me this and I'll do it for you.
So you showed up on campus and you happened to meet that person who worked at the Veterans Resource Center. That's so cool. What was your experience like? Were you also kind of worried about getting into college?
I had the same experience as Andre. I called, made an appointment for the normal counselor for school, and then during that appointment, they were like, oh, you're a veteran. Let me connect you with the veteran service people. And through that, I was able to get connected, and they were able to help out a lot.
Our November show commemorated the 50th year anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. We hosted a live panel of Vietnam veterans discussing their experiences. In this clip, veterans Stephen Burchick and James Hill described coming home from Vietnam.
I want to welcome our guests from the Army, Stephen Burchick and James Hill, who spent the war in the fields of Vietnam. Welcome, Steve and Jim. If you could start us off, and by the way, Steve is a former co-host on the show, so we know each other very well, but if you could start off for our viewers at home and tell us a little bit about your military service.
I was in the Army, 1st Infantry Division. We were stationed in 3 Corps, northeast of Saigon, and area with lots of jungles and rivers. And I was there June 68 to June 69.
We've seen some of those jungles and rivers there on the screen, so thank you for contributing those photos too, Steve. Jim, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about your military service?
Yes, I was in the Army and with the 25th Infantry Division in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And we deployed to South Vietnam in January of '66. And we were stationed in a community called Cu Chi, which is where all the tunnels and were found, and it was near the rubber tree plantations. At any rate, I was a rifle platoon leader the first 6 months, and then the second 6 months I was a pathfinder.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here.
Yes, thank you guys. It's nice seeing you again. We met last week a couple times. I appreciate you joining us again today. And so I know our previous guests, they did multiple years in the military, and you both did. Was it 4, Stephen?
I was 2 years in the service.
And then
I was 7 active, 2 reserve.
Okay, so you did a decent amount of time, but then you also transitioned a lot sooner than our last 2 guests. So maybe you can elaborate on what was the reception you received when you came back to the States?
I got back June '69, and by that time the country was in a great deal of turmoil. In 1968, deployment peaked at 500,000 U.S. troops in country. Every day on the news, the figures were coming in. They'd be showing the number of people killed. So understandably, a lot of people were upset. I had heard this from other people, so coming back, I was discharged out of Oakland Army Base. It was my last day in the Army, my last day in Vietnam. And I had been advised by some other people, so as soon as I got out, took my uniform off, didn't talk about the service. The few times I did, it would result in a heated discussion in some cases.
Wow.
And actually that lasted more than 40 years. And I'll describe when the transition came. But the only other issue was when I got back, my wife and I, my fiance and I were engaged to be married in about 4 weeks. And it was about 4 days later, and we're walking along, and there was a backfire from a car, and I hit the ground because other times it had helped save my life. In this case, I got a little mud on my shirt, but fortunately, cars don't backfire as much anymore. The electronic ignition helps.
That's interesting.
Thank you. Jim, how was when you came back to the States, how were you treated? How was the reception?
Well, I came back in January of '67 and came back into Travis Air Force Base, as Steve did. And then I was heading back east to my home in Richmond, Virginia. So I was going to fly to Washington, D.C., so I went to San Francisco. Well, as everybody knows, San Francisco is pretty aggressive, so they were ahead of the curve on demonstrations. And I walk into the airport, and the first thing that happens, a young woman and a young man spit on me. And that was my introduction, return home. So
You were in uniform?
I was in uniform.
Wow.
I then went to the restroom, changed my uniform, and then proceeded going to the East Coast.
Was that unexpected, or did you sort of feel?
Had no clue, and it was very disheartening, and unfortunately I took action, so.
Wow.
Caused me to do something I didn't want to do.
I'm sorry that you had to experience that. I know that we've heard stories like that before, but for you to have personally experienced that.
I hope you have enjoyed our look back at the past year of Veterans Voices. We are honored to serve our veterans community with these in-depth conversations about veterans issues. We look forward to a new year and exploring a whole new set of topics. We hope you will join us. Good night from all of us here at Veterans Voices.